What's up, everyone? It's Isaac Smolden, the production manager here at my house. Just letting everyone know that today's episode of Redemption is part 2 of our 2-part series with Elishaba Doerksen, who just recently published her book, Out of the Wilderness. If you haven't listened to part 1, it is episode 5 of Redemption, and highly recommend that you go back and take a listen to that before listening to today's episode and the exciting and moving conclusion of Elishaba's story. Remember that, again, today's episode may be especially triggering for survivors of domestic abuse or sexual assault, and that listener discretion is advised. And also that you can purchase Elishaba's book, Out of the Wilderness, at outofthewildernessbook.com. The link to do so is in the description. Without any further ado, here's Stacy, Julia, and Elishaba.
Warning. Some content discussed in this podcast can be triggering to survivors of sexual assault and difficult to hear. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Redemption Podcast with your hosts, Stacy
and Julia.
So then you get to Alaska, and then you go into the wilderness near McCarthy. And you live in a little cabin there and with all your 14 brothers and sisters. And then, so tell us about the life there a little bit, and then how did you decide to leave?
Well, Stacy, I think over the years, if I can back up just a hair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Over the years, the darkness got darker and darker. And really, my father was actually sexually abusing me when I was a baby. But for my conscience and understanding of what all that meant, he didn't cross that line actually till I was 19.
Okay.
And it started out in a bathtub where he took me out in the wilderness, and I won't get too graphic, but he had just been, my mom and my brothers actually came and started rebelling towards my father, which I wish we all had it done a long time ago. That was the worst sin you could commit in our home. So Papa turned into a raging lion, and he decided that I was to be his queen. And he actually used Bible verses like I was his Queen Esther, and I was to take Mama's place. And there wasn't anything that could hurt me worse than seeing my siblings suffer. I knew what it was like to be whipped and beat and starve. And the God that was being preached at me was, gonna throw me in hell if I didn't live up. And so I had this sensitive conscience. Everything I did, I had to tell Papa, and then I would suffer the consequences because he had to beat the devil out of me. And now his rage had grown so hard, stripping down my brothers and beating them over whipping barrels. And he saw how it played on my heart as well. And I'm begging him to change. And he's like, no, your job is to be here beside me, make me happy, rub my shoulders and help me through this because it's painful. And he'd go into his pity. And so he took me way out in the wilderness where he really crossed the line and started raping me and molesting me and telling me that he had to do this and that it was from God and that this was my job and that this was what Esther did, was save her people. But he didn't really do it. He never did it. He never really loved and forgave, which we didn't know what forgiveness meant. We thought forgiveness meant no more punishment. And as the years grew darker and we came to Alaska running from everything, and of course he even convinced my mom that it was okay and to be a part of it all. And he told my mom and me to keep it a secret, and using Bible verses like, it's a shame to speak of things done in secret.
Yeah.
And the whole Noah story of the third or the youngest son that came in and found him naked. He was cursed because he told his brothers. And so even though it was obvious, we all saw each other beat up all the time. I never told my brothers. It was the biggest secret that he was, treating me like his wife or a concubine. I didn't know how else to say it. I didn't even know the word sexual, to be honest with you. So out in the wilderness of Alaska, we got into this big, my papa went into a big fight with the Park Service and made a really big deal about it. Mm-hmm. Behind the scenes, he was playing manipulation, and I could see it all. In fact, he told me that the reason why he was doing all that was to prove to us kids that the world was evil and dark and against us. Wow. So that was his biggest plan.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yes, he was very, very smart. So getting to the place of escape, it was really amazing how hard it was to convince my own brain that this was the right thing to do. Yeah. I mean, and this is after I almost died so many times. And I think even in all those moments, there was times where I would hear the Bible because it was preached to me all my life. I'd heard it over and over and over again. And I would hear God say, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you." And so all throughout my life, the Jesus that was speaking to me was not the God that was being preached at me. And it just came to a point where my brothers even gave up and left after I told them what was happening, and they couldn't do anything. And I felt like if I left, my family would suffer. And it was my job to be that whipping boy behind the scenes and to convince my father not to hurt my family, which it didn't even work. So I finally told my father the truth and asked for some time away. And I went up to our little creek behind our cabin, and I knelt down and I cried out to God. And he showed me that I was actually worshiping my father instead of God. And that was a huge change for me because I couldn't prove it in the Bible. There was no way I could prove it. He was mopping the floor with me every night. And that changed my heart. So out of all the years and all the opportunities I could have got away, I wouldn't. There was no way you could have convinced me. I had to be convinced in my heart and in my mind that this was the right thing to do over what I've been taught was right. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
completely.
It does to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I can imagine that moment that, I mean, would you call that a revelation where you're like, no, you've been worshiping your dad this whole time, but I'm here and I will never leave you.
Yeah. It was a huge revelation.
Oh my God.
And I remember it was after that, it took 2 months. Even my brothers told me, you got to leave, like Satan's chasing you. And none of them could understand. Like, even my siblings couldn't understand. They saw me as my dad's right-hand man. He would send me to hurt them. It was probably one of the most painful things I did. Because he told me that if I didn't hurt them or do what he said, that he would hurt them worse. And so my siblings have been hurt by me and hurt by my father. And it's just what he did on purpose, the damage that was done. And I think getting away had to do more to me understanding that it was not me who was in control of saving my family, and that I could leave on one thing, and that's that I was going to leave to find God and worship him instead. And so by that I escaped, and it was a narrow escape getting out, which I wrote in my book, Out of the Wilderness, for anyone to read it. It's an amazing escape, a narrow escape.
It is amazing.
Wow. How old were you when you left?
I was 29.
Okay.
And just before I left on my 29th birthday, I was in this room because he had beat me up. I couldn't hardly see out my eyes. And at one point I was ready to just like lay down and take my last breath. And before I did that, I decided to pick up the Bible and read it one last time. And I opened up to Psalms because David was a shepherd. I grew up being a shepherd. Jesus was a shepherd. And Jesus said he laid his life down for the sheep. So I kind of fantasized on that and hung on to the fact that possibly that was the Jesus that could love me. And I would beg God, just pardon me. If you would just pardon me if I die, because I've done what Papa said and I've done what the Bible says and obeyed my father. But the Bible verse I found said, my father and my mother has forsaken me, but the Lord will take me up. And I literally pictured myself being held by God. And I decided to live once again. I just kept deciding something. God would intervene every time.
And then a crazy story, leaving, and probably lots of different twists and turns and chapters going into your 30s, right? And so you just published the book. How long ago?
I just published Out of the Wilderness January.
Oh, okay, this year, yeah.
Or December. Yeah, just
okay. And how long have you been dreaming and planning of, just writing your story and sharing your story? And what made you want to share your story?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it started after I came out. God provided a family for me. And during that time, a family to stay with. During that time, I flew with them out to a little village where I was a camp counselor, like where you have little kids coming from the. And I remember these two little Native girls crying and telling me about the pain they were going through. And I was so shocked. I thought I was the only one in the world. And when I heard these little girls, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It's out here.
Yeah.
And so I started finding out that this world is full of sexual abuse, trauma, emotional, physical, and that there was an enemy out there to destroy us. And so it started 11 years ago where I actually started writing my story. I just started writing. And then at one point I wrote a huge book, actually. Missionary came over and helped me write it. I named it Unforsaken. And he was ready to publish it. And I'm like, I'm not ready. I just opened my heart up and I just like unloaded and saw my story. Yeah. And so really what happened was I walked into this conference where we call it Hearts Growing Towards Wellness. Mm-hmm. It's a Native mission that we go to. And I went as a participant and I walked in and started sharing my story with other people and hearing their stories. And it opened the door for me to start uncovering the layers of my heart and inviting Jesus in to see that there's redemption. And I was able to begin a journey of real forgiveness. And then 2 years ago, I was ready. I was ready to share my story. And Mike Yorkie, that's a whole nother story. It was actually at this same conference that I've become a leader at now.
Wow.
That Leslie Layfield, she is someone who writes, and she likes to say, your story matters. I love that. And she was sharing, and I talked to her. She got me in connection with her book agent, who got me in connection with a man named Mike Yorkie. And so over the past 2 years, Mike Yorkie and I have been working hard, and just, I would send him my story and he would help me put it to words, which he did an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
So Out of the Wilderness has arrived as an amazing piece of my story, actually.
Yeah.
We prayed
Yeah.
really hard about how much to put in, how much to leave out. And I believe that part of the journey of forgiveness is you have to name and understand the debt before you can forgive it.
Okay.
And in my story, in Out of the Wilderness, the book, I wanted to make sure that there was a piece of the debt. It's nothing like the whole story. And it's my story because all of my family have their own story.
Right.
Of course.
So in order for you to understand what there is to forgive, it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us, how can people find your book?
You can order my book on a website, outofthewildernessbook.com.
Okay.
So it's just book, outofthewildernessbook.com. And then on the 23rd, I'm going to be down at Fireside Bookstore. They have my book there in Palmer.
Okay.
I'll be signing.
April 23rd?
Yeah, at 1:00
1:00.
Cool.
till I think 7, something like that.
Okay.
I'll make it if I can.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I want to get a signed copy.
Yeah, and I would love to meet you in person.
And we'll have the link to the website in the description as well for those interested, so that it's right there. Just open the podcast description and click on that link, and it'll take you right to the book.
Okay, great.
I have a final question for you, Elishaba. So our podcast is called Redemption, and my role here at my house is I'm the project manager for the Redemption clothing line, which is a new business and job training program here. So the word redemption is extremely powerful, and it means different things to everyone. It has multiple definitions. And so I'm curious about, what does the word redemption mean to you?
I love to talk about redemption.
Yeah.
First of all, redemption to me is receiving and believing and knowing. I went from religion to relationship, and knowing that Jesus paid the price fully, all his righteousness for my unrighteousness. And redemption also, it has a lot of perspective of taking the focus off of what evil has done and focusing on the fact that God can use the evil for good. Just like Joseph in the Bible, he said to his brothers, what you meant evil, but God meant it for good. And so we tend to focus on and then another thing is like the enemies, who is the enemy? We often see the enemy is the face of those who've harmed us and done damage to us. But the real enemy is the enemy of God, who's out to destroy. And Jesus said that Satan comes as a thief, only to steal and to kill and destroy. But he says, I come that they may have life and may have it abundantly. Mm. So I also believe that, I don't know if you ever heard the story of Hind's feet on high places.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. It's a beautiful story because she talks about, she's much afraid, right?
Yeah.
And I believe Jesus actually calls us to follow his example of suffering. It's through sufferings and trials that we can find true love and relationship So like for me, I've had to be okay with suffering and sorrow, because if I'm not and I shut down, if you try to tell me your story, I'm going to shut you out.
Mm-hmm.
We all have suffering and trials, and all our stories are, your story is the most painful story you're going to experience. And keeping my heart open and allowing God to redeem the past also keeps my heart open for others in relationship with my husband and with my children. Actually, redemption can be as simple as eating oatmeal. Because like as a little girl, I couldn't eat my oatmeal. It would be cold and lumpy and I'd be starving. I would throw it up and my father would make me eat the throw up. And so my brain shut off and couldn't eat it. But then I married a man.
So this is powerful. You get to eat your oatmeal and enjoy it too.
Yeah, I married a man who loves oatmeal.
That's awesome.
He makes it good too.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I would really love to get together soon and have coffee and catch up. I really would. There's just a lot I would love to talk about with you. But anyways, I just want to go ahead and end here, and I'm going to end with some resources. Yep. But before I end with those resources, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so brave and sharing your story, Raleigh, and just giving people who are also experiencing dark sexual abuse hope. And so thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having me.
So if you are experiencing sexual assault and you are looking for some help, here are some resources for you at Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. You can call 907-586-3650. The national hotline number is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. Also in Alaska, the STAR hotline is 1-800-478-899. If you're looking for a series of overcoming trauma, Blaze Bell here in Alaska has a series on Facebook. You can find her on Facebook under Blaze Bell. She also has a virtual sexual abuse survivor support group that meets online. You can get more information from Blaze at bbell@staralaska.org. That's BBELL at staralaska.org. If you or someone you know are a victim of sex trafficking, please call 1-866-733-7878 or text HELP to 233-733. For local services here at my house, you can call 373-HELP. That's 373-HELP. Remember, if you see something, say something. This is Redemption, loved and thriving. Until next time.